My name is Chris Abrupta. I'm with Rutgers Cooperative Extension. If you can't hear me, then your headphones aren't working, and you might want to try to call in on the phone number instead of using the computer, okay? So kind of think about that. If you're going to use either the computer audio or your phone audio, just pick one. If you use both, you might get some feedback, okay? So today we're going to be talking about asking the right questions in stormwater review. This is a program that we had put together, Rutgers had put together with ANJAC and New Jersey DEP when the new stormwater regulations had come out several years ago, trying to help environmental commissions, planning boards, zoning boards, and other groups to be able to understand the regulations and what their responsibility was as a planning board or zoning board or environmental commissioner. Okay, so like I said, my name is Chris Abrupta. That's my email address there on that first slide. Hopefully you guys can all see that. If you ever need me, you can always email me. I do get about 120 emails a day, so if I don't get right back to you, please be persistent because I will eventually get back to you. So one of the main points with this is that people are very confused about these stormwater regulations and always have been. The stormwater regulations were adopted by New Jersey DEP, and as part of that adoption process, they required the towns to adopt a stormwater control ordinance and a stormwater management plan. So ultimately, the town is the only one that's responsible for ensuring that all developers comply with the regulations. That responsibility lies solely within the municipality. So if a developer comes to you and says, well, I've got a permit from New Jersey DEP, so you don't have to review my stormwater regulations, that's incorrect. New Jersey DEP cannot approve their stormwater management plan for their major development. Only the township can do that. And at the end of the year, the township is required to fill out a form saying that they have reviewed and approved all the stormwater management plans for all the major development in their municipality. Okay, so that becomes a very, very important factor. Okay, so like I said, I'm with Rutgers Cooperative Extension. We've been around for about 100 years. Rutgers University is a land-grant college for the state of New Jersey. That's something that Abraham Lincoln created in the 1860s. They gave large chunks of land to universities across the country so they could better teach agricultural and mechanical arts. Rutgers competed against Princeton, and not only did we beat them in the first football game, we beat them out on this too and became the land-grant university. About 20 years later, we realized that we did not know how to be better farmers, so we started the Agriculture Experiment Station so we can do research on how to be better farmers. And then around 1914, we realized most farmers don't go to college, they farm, so we formed the Cooperative Extension Service. The idea is to extend the knowledge university out to the people of the state. We have an office in every county, and the idea is that you can go to the county office. If you were the farmer, had a bug on your potato, you can go to the county office, and that county agent would explain to you how to deal with that. If they didn't know, then they would come to university, and we would do research and figure out how to deal with the problem. Now, over the years, we stopped growing corn and started growing houses, so now we're more of an urban-suburban as well as agricultural cooperative extension service. So we serve all of New Jersey, not just the farmers. Okay, I came to Rutgers about 17 years ago, and I started the Water Resources Program. Our mission to identify and address community water resources issues using sustainable and practical science-based solutions. As you know, every mission statement must have as many buzzwords as possible in it, and that has them all. So I'm housed in New Brunswick on Cook campus. I have 8 full-time staff who work for me, all being paid off of grant funding. And we have anywhere between 10 to 20 undergrad students working for us throughout the year. Most of them work full-time over the summer. And we run around the state and help people solve their water problems. And that's what we do. So that's a big part of our program. I work very closely with environmental county agents that we have. This is a little bit of an old slide. Michelle Backus serves Union and Middlesex County. Pat Rector is Morris and Somerset County. Pat Rector recently retired, and we're hoping to replace her. Amy Rowe is Essex and Passaic. Mike Haberlin is Camden and Burlington. And Sal Magnifico is Salem and Cumberland. We also have Steve Urjo, who is working in Ocean and Atlantic County. So the idea was that we had agents in each county office that were agriculture agents. So we added these environmental agents to the offices with the ultimate goal of having an environmental agent in every single county, each one serving a county and working with the non-agriculture community and trying to help towns and nonprofits and other groups kind of move forward with addressing their environmental concerns in the town. So we're still hoping to expand this program and add more county agents over the years, but right now we kind of stopped at 6, and but the future is bright, and we're hoping to have more. So ANJAC is a sponsor of this. All you guys know ANJAC, great organization. I've had the pleasure of working with them for many years now, and really trying to achieve responsible, sustainable use of New Jersey's natural resources. Lots of leadership comes out of ANJAC. A lot of what ANJAC does is try to create all of you folks on the phone, make you guys into better leaders, better public advocates for the environment, and also have a clearer understanding of regulations so that you can help the community enforce the regulations as you go along. So big fan of ANJAC. It's still not too late to donate this year to ANJAC and get that tax deduction, so think about that as you move forward, okay? So what happens when it rains? So first of all, the rain can be quickly absorbed into the ground. It can infiltrate into the ground. It can serve, recharging the groundwater table. It can evaporate. But what we most care about is stormwater runoff. So what winds up happening is when it rains and there's snow melt on a beautiful Monday evening like today when it's pouring rain, that's carrying all the pollution, off to the rivers and the lakes and polluting our waterways and causing flooding. So this is kind of what we're worried about, and this is what we're trying to stop from happening when we have major development, okay? So stormwater runoff, basically water from the rain or melting snows. So this is kind of what we're talking about here. That little stream on the lower right-hand corner is a little tributary by my house in Hillsborough. It's usually a little trickle of water unless we get a little bit of rain. It becomes this muddy mess carrying water out to the Royce Brook. So these are things we're trying to avoid. We talk a lot about the hydrologic cycle, the water cycle. Our kids learn this in 4th grade. They learn about how the water is cycled through this cycle. We can't create or destroy water. It is just there and transforming how it appears in our environment. We explain often to the kids that the water they're drinking is the same water the dinosaurs peed in billions of years ago, and kids tend to get a kick out of that. But we've changed this water cycle. We've added lots of development. Under a natural condition, a wooded forested condition, we get about 10% stormwater runoff. As we add single-family homes, 1-2 acre lots, we get about 20% runoff. As we add more dense development, 1/4 acre, 1/2 acre lots, we get 30% stormwater runoff. And then when we get downtown New Brunswick or some of our bigger cities, we get about 55% runoff. New Jersey gets on average about 44, 45 inches of rain a year. The climate is changing. That's real. It's not a myth. And that number is expected to go up to 48 to maybe 50 inches a year as climate continues to change. So we will get more water in New Jersey. So as we add more impervious surfaces, we get more stormwater runoff. So an impervious surface is any surface that water won't pass through. Roof of a building, a roadway, parking lot, sidewalks, even the very compacted lawns that we see in some of the retirement communities along the Jersey Shore. Although it looks like grass, it's so compacted water can't get through there, so they're effectively become impervious surfaces. So this becomes things that we really worry about. Impervious surfaces provide areas for pollutants to accumulate. When it rains, it carries these pollution off. Also, very importantly, it inhibits groundwater recharge. About 50% of the water we use in this state comes from the ground. So we're trying to get water back in the ground. If we don't get water back in the ground, we don't have water to irrigate our crops, we don't have water to drink, and we don't have water to feed our streams in the summer months when it gets very hot and we don't get a lot of rain. So that's very important to think about. So as we change our landscape, we add more impervious cover. These are some of the things we see: more stormwater runoff volumes, higher peak flows, a lot more non-point source pollution, which is pollution that runs off the land, and less groundwater recharge. So these are things we're trying to avoid. So by adding those impervious surfaces, we've created a new water cycle, an urban water cycle. So we get much less infiltration and much more stormwater runoff. And now we're trying to figure out through stormwater management how we can reduce that runoff and get more infiltration into the ground. And that's a lot of what our stormwater regulations are written about. The current regulations were passed in 2004. There are new regulations that are expected to come out after the new year. They're the same requirements in the regulations. The only difference is of how we're going to manage stormwater. They're going to require more green infrastructure to be used to manage stormwater. So things aren't going to change all that much except for the practices that are put in place to manage the stormwater runoff. So this is a typical science of stormwater. We see these hydrographs, which map time versus flow rate. So during a natural condition, we see that red line, we get much higher runoff when we get much more impervious cover. So you see the peak is much higher. As we add a detention basin, that flattens out, that becomes that yellow line. And then when we add some infiltration systems, it flattens out even further and becomes that green line. So we're trying to change how runoff leaves the land, where it goes, how it's being managed. And this is a graph that we often see in our stormwater management applications for all our major development. Okay, so I think we're okay, right? So history of stormwater management. This is my favorite part of this talk. The bottom right photo, Main Street, that's Manville, New Jersey. And that's during one of the nor'easters that we have. That sign is really about 9 feet high. So people kid me that sign's 2 feet off the ground, but it's really not. The bridge on the left side is constantly flooded. It doesn't take much water to flood those bridges out, but 2 or 3 inches of rain and you see cars floating away. It's not unusual in New Jersey, okay? So the first attempt at stormwater management was to grab the water and throw it in a catch basin and pipe it into the river directly. There's no storage. There's no holding it back. Let's hurry it downstream and let the next town downstream worry about it. So if you're in Hillsborough or Montgomery Township in Somerset County, we let Manville worry about it, or Bound Brook. So this was the original concept: hurry up and get it away. Taking into no account what our downstream neighbor might be experienced because of our stormwater runoff and how we manage it. So that's part of the issue. The second iteration, we decided to create these big, beautiful detention basins. So detention basin really is the idea of a detention basin was to grab all the stormwater runoff and hold it and let it out slowly. Okay, so we took a 50-acre farm or 50-acre woodland, and we put houses on it with lots of pavement and rooftops. We increased the amount of stormwater that's running off of that area, and then we put it in the basin and we let it out slowly. So the basin does not infiltrate stormwater. Most of these basins are very compacted, very little water gets infiltrated. So it just holds the water and lets out slowly to prevent that peak from flooding downstream. Most of these basins are designed for the 100-year storm, which is about 8 inches of rain over 24 hours. The 100-year storm does not come once every 100 years. The chance of getting it this year is 1 in 100. It's more of a probability thing. So this is why we get the 100-year storm every few years, because we're just a very unlucky state, I guess. So the idea with these basins was to hold the water, let out slowly. Somebody started worrying about mosquitoes, and they said, well, if we have standing water for more than 72 hours, mosquitoes breed, and we'll have serious problems from health effects. So somebody decided that we're going to put in these concrete low-flow channels. So the bottom of this basin is graded at about 0.5%. It's very hard to grade soil at 0.5%, but New Jersey is the concrete king of the world, and we can pour concrete at 0.5% all day long. So we pour these little concrete low-flow channels in there. The water's supposed to go to that channel and hurries out of the basin, so we don't have any standing water. The problem with the person who invented these channels didn't realize that these basins really aren't maintained in a way to prevent those channels from clogging. So when they mow the basins or when sediment comes into the basins, it settles out in the channel. And if somebody came to me and said, Dr. Abrupta, could you design perfect mosquito breeding habitat? It would be these concrete low flow channels, 3 to 6 inches of standing water, hard concrete bottom, no predators, out in the sunlight. So by not maintaining these low flow channels, we've actually created the exact thing we were trying to avoid, mosquito breeding. So these became a big issue in New Jersey, and a lot of towns are trying to get rid of these right now. So the third iteration that came out in 2004, regulations came out. There were 2 sets of regulations that came out. There was a stormwater permitting regulation and a stormwater management regulation. The stormwater permitting regulations, often referred to as the Phase 2 regulations, or also the MS4 permit. The 4 S's, M stands for municipal. The 4 S's stands for stormwater, storm sewer system. Separate storm sewer system. That's the 4 S's. Sorry. Okay. So the idea is that every town in New Jersey, all 565 towns, have a permit for their stormwater system, for the piping in the road, the ditches on the side of the road, anything that moves stormwater around their town, they have a permit for. These are the permits that require you to do street sweeping, to clean out your catch basins. These are the permits that require you to adopt a pet waste ordinance and don't feed wildlife ordinance. So these are those ordinances. So the other thing that was passed was stormwater management regulations. The idea with this was that we were required to manage stormwater from any major development. So major development was defined as any development that disturbs more than 1 acre or adds a 1/4 acre of impervious cover. So the idea was to reduce flood damage, reduce soil erosion, protect the public. So a lot of things there. Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit more about the 2020 changes in the regulations. The 2020 changes in the regulations, someone was asking about the new regulations that are coming out, and they have not been finalized yet. They've just been proposed. They have not been adopted yet. But the new regulations does not change the definition of major development. It's still disturbing 1 acre or adding a 1/4 acre impervious cover. You're still required to do all the things you're required to in the earlier regulations. The 2020 regulations just ask you to do it a little differently, and that's mainly with green infrastructure, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute or two. Okay. So the third generation, this is one that came out in 2004. Not only are you required to manage these peak flows, but you're required to maintain groundwater recharge and reduce pollution to our local waterways. So the idea was you're required to maintain 100% of your annual average groundwater recharge. So if you had a 50-acre piece of land that was wooded, that was recharging 1 million gallons of stormwater a year, after you put up all your townhouses, it needs to be recharging 1 million gallons of stormwater a year. It also requires you to remove 80% of the sediment, the total suspended solids. So any of the runoff off the property, you have to filter and make sure there's no sediment that leaves the property. So those were the 2 additions to regulation. So not only just dealing with water quantity, but we're dealing with water quality and groundwater recharge. So how do we do that? Well, we have a video here that kind of shows that. This is a video from the American Society of Landscape Architecture. Hopefully I'll be able to get it to work. So let's see how this works here.
Landscape architects design ways to divert and collect rainwater to prevent damage and replenish the aquifer. An aquifer is a below-ground natural reservoir of water that we use for drinking, cooking, bathing, and irrigation. The animation will demonstrate how rainwater is managed on a university campus plaza. The plaza surface
I guess you guys can't hear that, can you?
Materials. Concrete defines the walks and steps, and sod and lawn make up the open space. The building's roof, which also collects and discharges water, is a plain solid surface. Storm sewer and drains are ready to catch and pipe water away from the site and prevent flooding.
Oh, they can hear it?
During heavy rainfall, these materials, like concrete and sod, can only
Okay,
absorb
great.
so much water. The excess rainwater on the surface is funneled into the storm sewers. The building's roof diverts most of its water down pipes into storm drains as well. All this excess water, called runoff, can overtax and cause the storm drains to back up. This causes water to collect in ever-expanding pools. Too much runoff due to heavy rains can cause damage and sometimes catastrophic floods. It also results in more polluted, untreated water entering the aquifer. There are more effective means to manage stormwater using sustainable systems and materials that prevent flooding and replenish the aquifer. The first system is a green roof placed on top of a
I
building.
can't hear it on the
The
phone.
green roof is layered with drainage materials, compost or planting soils, and vegetation. The green roof can absorb some of the rainfall, reducing the amount of water flowing into the storm drains. Another system involves porous
We'll make the
pavement.
video available
Concrete
after.
surfaces are replaced with individual concrete bricks called pavers. Each paver is interlocked with its neighbor and separated by permeable material. The permeable material is composed of small crushed rocks, also called aggregates. Zooming into the cross-section, we see the permeable aggregates between and below the pavers. The aggregate-filled space acts as a sponge, absorbing water downward, diverting a good amount of runoff from the storm drains. The diverted water will eventually make its way into the aquifer below ground. The third system is called bioretention and is also known as a rain garden. A rain garden is a swale or channel that absorbs, holds, and slowly releases excess water. A rain garden section is composed of compacted soils defining the depth, width, and slope of the swale, sand and drainage materials, plant soils, and vegetation native to the region. Rain gardens are not only aesthetically pleasing, they also restore wildlife habitat. Now when it rains, water does not collect into large pools. Instead, our three systems absorb and redirect the excess runoff. The green roof prevents a lot of water from entering the storm system or hitting the ground. The porous concrete pavers absorb some of the rainwater and direct it downward into the aquifer. And the rain garden accumulates the remainder of the rainwater, preventing flooding and damage. As part of its function, the rain garden slowly releases rainwater into the aquifer over a 24-hour period. Just as important, the vegetation acts as a natural water purifier, absorbing pollutants and toxins from the water. Water is in high demand and shortages are common. These three systems are able to capture and treat more water than typical stormwater mechanisms. The systems are effective, easy to implement, and contribute to a more sustainable water management practice.
Okay, let's talk about this video for a second. I know some of you on the phone could not hear it. We will make it available to you to look at. The whole concept here was, though, that they talk a little bit about how a college campus is typically developed, and the idea is that we can better manage stormwater. So they talk a little bit about a green roof, which is one of the green infrastructure systems that we recommend people use for new development. A green roof will hold about a half inch of rainwater on the roof before it gets to the ground, and the plants on the roof will use that. It talks about bioretention systems, which are also known as rain gardens. So these are landscape features that are actually designed to capture the rainwater that's running off and hold the water and filter the water and infiltrate the water into the ground. And then it talks about permeable pavement, right? In this case, it talks about the paving stones. So the idea is the water goes onto the paving stones and it goes through the slots between the paving stones and slowly makes its way into the groundwater table. And the whole concept of that is, once again, we're cleaning the water as it passes through the stone layer and into the paving stones, and eventually it gets into the groundwater table and recharging the groundwater. So here you have three systems. You know, the permeable pavement that filters the water and infiltrates it back into the ground. The rain gardens that filters the water, infiltrates it back into the ground, and then the green roof, which actually holds the water, and the plants use it and evaporates or transpires through the plants back into the atmosphere. So really three components that are really restoring the water cycle that has been altered because of our development of our areas. So that's kind of what this shows. And these new techniques are the ones that are being required under the new 2020 regulations. They will require you to do. Certainly bioretention systems are going to be one of them that will be required for all major developments to achieve the standards that we're going to talk about today. So if you do have any questions, you certainly could put it in the chat, and we'll try to respond, and Holly's keeping an eye on that for me. And thankfully, there hasn't been too many questions, except for Richard. He's always asking questions. But other than that, I think we're okay for now. So the stormwater management objectives, there were really kind of 4 objectives with this. One was using these non-structural management strategies, right? So thinking about how to better manage the water without actually having to build too many things. Protecting communities from increases in stormwater, so this is really kind of flooding issues, maintaining groundwater recharge, and also filtering out pollution. So that's really the other component of the regulations. And none of that has changed with the 2020 requirements. This talks about major development. We discussed this earlier, disturbing 1 acre or more, or increasing impervious area by a 1/4 acre. Okay, and if you do that, then you have to comply with these regulations. And you'll notice, once again, non-structural strategies, quantity, recharge, and quality. And the other bullet here is a stormwater maintenance plan. Anything that you build to manage stormwater, you have to provide a maintenance plan for, so that whoever owns and operates that facility knows how to take care of it and make sure it's being properly maintained. We know that if things aren't maintained, they tend to stop functioning in every walk of life. Non-structural strategies, these are often referred to as low-impact development principles. The idea is to collect and infiltrate stormwater near its source. This second bullet is the main focus of the 2020 regulations, is how do we disperse stormwater practices throughout the development so we can collect the water, infiltrate it as close to the source of stormwater as possible. So you begin talking about smaller systems that are managing smaller amounts of water. Somebody wants to know, is there a concern in parking lots that allow infiltration that pollutants will be conveyed into the groundwater table? That is a concern at times. Typical parking lots where cars are on it, usually not too much of a problem. Even if the cars are leaking a little bit of oil, usually that's not an issue. We tend not to promote infiltration off of very dirty places like where they keep the school buses, or where the Public Works Department keeps their trucks. So any kind of older vehicles that might be leaking fluids and things like that, or heavy use vehicles, we do not encourage infiltration from those places. Actually, it's not allowed in the regulations to infiltrate from those places. So, for example, you're not allowed to infiltrate from a gas station. So that's another aspect of it. Okay. So capturing runoff from small events is another issue. So, and kind of using vegetative practices to do that, and minimizing and disconnecting impervious surfaces. And we'll talk more about disconnection. It's a very powerful tool that we don't use enough of in New Jersey. So water quantity regulations, these have not changed. These have been the regulations prior to 2004. The idea is we're going to control the post-development for the 2, the 10, and 100-year storm events. So in other words, we calculate how much stormwater runs off of before we develop. So for the 2-year event, that's about 3.3 inches of rain over 24 hours. A 10-year event is about 5 inches of rain over 24 hours, and the 100-year event is about 8 inches of rain over 24 hours. That varies depending on what county you're in. So there's a range of that. So you can see there are some numbers on the bottom about the 2, the 10, the 100-year rainfall events. So the idea is that you measure, you calculate what's coming off the land now, and you try to reduce that after you develop. Okay. The third bullet on this list, design BMPs. Now, BMP stands for Best Management Practice. That's something that we use all the time. We talk about these stormwater measures. So the BMPs for the 2, the 10, 100-year storm, it talks about reducing the peak flow. So for the 2-year storm, it's a 50% reduction. The 10-year storm is a 75% reduction. I'm sorry, 75% of the peak. And for 100-year storm, it's 80% of the peak. So for the 100-year storm, if 100 cubic feet per second is your peak flow off the land, after you develop, it can only be 80 cubic feet per second. So you really have to do a job of kind of managing this and go through that. Um, so how recently was a 100-year storm event revised? That's a great question. They just revised this about 10 years ago. It used to be about 7.3 inches of rain. Now it's 8.3 inches of rain. The problem is, though, this is based on historic rainfall. This does not take into account future climate change. So we would expect that to increase over time. What our climate scientists tell us is that we're going to get more intense storm events in New Jersey, followed by longer periods of drought. So on a day like today, we're going to get a few inches of rain, and then it may not rain for 3 or 4 weeks afterwards. So that's kind of what we expect the future to be as we move forward. There's a lot of questions about green roofs that we'll get into a little bit later as we go on, okay? So groundwater standards, maintain 100% of your average annual groundwater recharge. This is a pretty simple thing. If you're recharging 1 million gallons of stormwater before development, afterwards you need to be recharging 1 million gallons of stormwater. The second requirement talks about the 2-year storm, measuring the pre-development versus the peak development. Usually the second calculation gives you a larger volume of stormwater to recharge, okay? So most people who do these calculations use that first requirement, maintain 100% of their average annual groundwater recharge, okay? Yeah, so there's a question about is the developer held to reduce the peak flow or simply not exceed pre-development? No, they are required to reduce the peak flow. So for the 2-year storm, they have to, the post-development peak has to be 50% of the pre-development peak. Okay, for the 10-year, it has to be 75% of the pre-development peak, and for the 100 years, it has to be 80% of the pre-development peak. So you are reducing it. You got to keep in mind, you're getting a lot more stormwater runoff after post-development because you're adding so much impervious cover. Another question, do you know the years that most recent rainfall annual increase of 8.3 inches from? I do not. This is something that the new rainfall totals were calculated by NRCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and the Soil Conservation District. So this was done about 10 years ago. And they try to go back as far as they can, but I think it's probably 30 or 40 years. I'm not really sure what the exact numbers are. Are there penalties for not meeting post-development? Okay, so this is a really interesting question. If you don't satisfy these requirements, you cannot approve the development. Okay, so let's just go on to this next one, and then we'll talk a little bit more about that, okay? So the last one is water quality. You need to install a best management practice to reduce at least 80% of your total suspended solids load. And you must provide nutrient removal to the maximum extent feasible. Okay, so originally when they talked about these regulations, they had numbers in here for how much sediment you had to reduce by, how much nitrogen, phosphorus, lead, zinc. And then somebody realized that, well, if we design things to remove sediment, it'll also remove all those other things. Okay, so what the New Jersey DEP did was they came out with a Stormwater Best Management Practice Manual that tells you how to design these different systems, and they rated the systems for how much total suspended solids, or TSS, it'll remove. So you can see on here the bioretention system and the constructed wetlands are the best systems. They remove up to 90% of the sediment, okay? Now, once again, the requirement's 80%, so if you use a forested buffer that only gets you 70%, you'll have to do something else also. You can see the detention basin gets you between 40 to 60%. So to get 80%, you have to put something before the detention basin to filter out some of the sediment, and then the detention basin will polish off the rest. So this required us to begin designing stormwater systems in treatment trains. So we see, different systems paired together to be able to get that 80%. A lot of people ask, what is the maximum extent feasible? Well, that depends who you are. If you're a developer, the maximum extent feasible may be a much lower number than if you're an environmentalist. So that's always been a question that we've had. Those terminology comes from EPA, and it's been very difficult to get a real calculation of what that number should be, okay? So we do have guidance for this, Stormwater Management Manual, the BMP manual on the right, and the Tier A Municipal Stormwater Guidance document. So the Tier A is the permit. For Tier A communities, there's 2 permits, MS4 permits, stormwater permits that towns have. Tier A is for the more developed towns. Tier B is for the rural towns. There's 99 Tier B towns. There's the rest of the 565 municipalities are Tier A municipalities that have to achieve a much higher requirements of what they must do. The municipal stormwater management rules or permitting rules are the ones that require towns to pass a stormwater control ordinance and to manage stormwater from any new development or major development. Okay. Oh yeah. So Liz is saying that this is being recorded, and you can download this on the ANJEC website when we're done, and we'll also probably have the video posted up there too if you want to go back and kind of see that. So questions? Well, we've been answering those as we're going along. So I think we'll just continue on. So once again, we just want to remind you that the approval of the developer stormwater management plan lies solely within the municipality. So if the municipality approves a plan and does not comply with those three requirements, the groundwater recharge requirement, the water quality requirement, the water quantity requirement, then the town is held liable for that. And we've seen this in some towns where they've let developments go in and kind of waive these requirements. There is no waiving any of these requirements. You cannot waive a requirement for any reason whatsoever. You can offset the requirement if you have a stormwater mitigation plan. So if you have a plan that says, well, you know, there may be a development that has to go in, but you can't satisfy the groundwater recharge requirement on that development site, you could do a mitigation project off-site that accounts for that reduction that you were unable to get. But you must have a stormwater mitigation plan that's approved to be able to do that in order to do that. So, there's a question here, will you address minor site development? There is no requirements for minor site development. In New Jersey, they're only for major development, which is disturbing 1 acre of land or adding a quarter-acre impervious cover. But we, as a state, are a home rule state, and any town in New Jersey could change that and make it more stringent. Towns have changed that disturbing 1 acre to disturbing a quarter acre. Towns have changed adding 10,000 square feet or a quarter-acre impervious cover to adding 5,000 square feet of impervious cover. So these are things that you can change as a town. We've worked with towns to make these changes, made recommendations on how they could do it. For example, if you're a town like Trenton, New Jersey, where you don't have 1 acre of land that's going to be developed, you have smaller pieces of land, you may want to change that criteria from 1 acre down to something smaller. And stormwater mitigation plans, we can talk a little bit more about that later, but they are municipal plans. They're developed on a municipal basis. There are no county plans, but you are required to do that. So let's move on with this. Okay, so this is an interesting thing. As municipal officials, what is not your responsibility? You don't need to know how to meet the required non-structural strategies. You don't need to know how to design a stormwater practices. You don't need to know how to maintain a practice. But you do need to know that you're responsible for ensuring that all major development are compliant with the regulations. Originally, when we started doing this, New Jersey DEP asked me to teach all of you how to be engineers. But most people go to college for 4 years to do that and have to practice for quite a while to be an engineer. And it's kind of a little bit silly trying to teach people who are volunteering with a wide range of background on how to be an engineer. So the best we can do is to teach you how to ask the right questions. And that's what we're trying to accomplish here. So if you allow development to go in and it doesn't comply with these regulations, the town is liable. And we've seen this happen in one town where they let development go in, they weren't satisfying the groundwater recharge requirements, and the town had to come in and had to fix the system. Developer was long gone. Most developments, they develop a piece of property under a company name. After the property is developed, they get their bond back, they dissolve the company and start another company for the next development. So if something goes wrong and a township approves the development to go in, didn't comply with the regulations, it's hard to go back after the developer. So in this case, the town had to go in and spend $250,000 to redesign the stormwater system and a lot more money to actually reconstruct it. And that was all at taxpayer dollars because they didn't make the developer follow the regulations. So the taxpayer got the burden of that, which is what we're trying to avoid. Okay? So, once again, just because you have a permit from New Jersey DEP does not mean your stormwater management plan has been approved. They may have looked at the stormwater components, they may have commented on it, but in the end, the municipality has to approve that plan. You will often see an attorney come in for a developer waving paperwork around. Look, I got my DEP permit. You don't need to look at my stormwater stuff. That's incorrect. You still have to review their stormwater permit, their stormwater application on their plans and make sure it complies with the state regulations. If it doesn't, DEP won't be held liable. You as a town will be held liable. So we start thinking about how to do this. The first way to do this is we look at how a developer needs to approach this, and first we often look at let's maintain our groundwater recharge, because in doing that we can reduce our sediment or nutrient reductions and our peak flow reductions. The first step is use non-structural strategies. So this is a component that's being replaced by the new stormwater regulations coming out in 2020. So these non-structural strategies are still in there, but what the state is saying that by using green infrastructure, you're complying with these strategies, which some people do not agree with, other people do. But these are very straightforward things when you start thinking about them, okay? And we'll go through some of these pretty quickly, and you can see what we're talking about here. We can break these 9 strategies down to 4 categories: vegetation, landscaping, maintaining or minimizing site disturbance, managing our impervious cover, and reducing or slowing down the runoff, reducing time of concentration. So it's really kind of slowing down how quickly the water leaves your property. That's what number 4 is. Okay, so first one is protect areas that provide water quality benefits. So we often see we've got these vegetative buffers, streams. So we're trying to protect these areas, not disturb these areas, keep the development out of these areas, which is very important. There are regulations that allow you to prevent you from developing with certain proximity to the stream, depending on where you are in the state. Some are 300-foot buffers, some are less, but we do have buffers around our streams that are required. Minimizing impervious surfaces or breaking it up. So this is very interesting. We have in here a photograph of a house, and this has a downspout that gets piped right to the road. Okay, so the water leaves that rooftop and goes right to the road, right to the catch basin, and goes right to the stream. What winds up happening here is every drop of rain that hits that roof goes right into that catch basin, right into the stream. That roof is directly connected to the stream. Nowhere along the way does that water have a chance to infiltrate or go into the ground. Many of our houses have these concrete splash pans off of those downspouts, and water goes across that front lawn. That front lawn can absorb the first half-inch of rain, and that would really disconnect that rooftop from flowing directly to the stream. But in this case, you are directly connected because you're piping the water to the road, which directly goes to the catch basin. One way to disconnect is to use a rain garden or a bioretention system, and the idea is the water can go into this landscape feature, and it'll slowly infiltrate into the ground. A rain garden is 3 to 6 inches deep, some ponding water. That rain garden can be designed to capture the first 3 to 4 inches of rain from that rooftop, whereas your lawn would only absorb maybe the first half-inch of rain. So it's a much more robust system. It does a much better job of managing stormwater. So this is a great example from New Jersey DEP. This is out of the Best Management Practice Manual. We have 1 acre of pavement, 2 acres of grassed area or pervious area, and we get 1.25 inches of rain. So 1.25 inches of rain becomes very significant in the state. We call 1.25 inches of rain our water quality storm. Okay, so 90%, presently 90% of the storm events we get come in storms that are less than 1.25 inches. Now, as climate continues to change, that number is going to go up. We've yet to be able to get a number from our client scientists. They're unwilling to say it's going to be 1.5, 1.75, but they know it's going to go up. So your 1.25 inches rain hits the 1 acre pavement, all runs off, goes to the road, goes to the inlet. 1.25 inches rain hits the grassed area, and very little of it runs off. You get 28,500 gallons of stormwater runoff. So as a municipality, the number one thing you're worried about is money, right? So how can we reduce this runoff by 85% for absolutely nothing, for free? You can't get any better than that unless I pay you to do it. So what if, instead of we have the water run off the pavement, we have the water run onto the grass or pervious area? So when it rains, water will sheet flow off of that pavement into the grass area. So sheet flow on a day like today, you're standing in Walmart parking lot, watch how the water moves across the parking lot. It moves as a sheet of water about an inch thick. When that inch thick sheet of water hits that grass, it's 2 or 3 inches high, it slows it down, it filters it out, it absorbs it, and that water has a chance to infiltrate into the ground. So now you've gone from 28,500 gallons of stormwater runoff to 4,360 gallons of stormwater runoff. It cost you absolutely nothing. You had to pave it anyway. You just paved it a different way. You thought about it differently. You ran the water onto that pervious area. So you reduced that parking lot, that 1 acre parking lot, to about 1/8 of an acre. Reduced the runoff on that by 85%. Now, if the design storm is a 10-year storm and that's 5 inches of rain, that percent difference only drops to about 15%. That grass area cannot absorb 5 inches of rain from that parking area. But like I said before, 90% of the rainfall events come in less than 1.25 inches. So 90% of the time we can make that 1 acre parking lot look like 1/8 of an acre by simply changing how we pave it and changing where we send the water to from that parking lot. So this is the power of disconnection. This is what we're trying to do wherever we can, is disconnect those impervious surfaces from flowing directly to our waterways. So you can see impervious surfaces, the one on the upper left-hand side shows you a natural roadway where water runs off the road and goes into these grassed areas near the road. The one on the upper right is typical New Jersey, big wide roads, sidewalks on both sides, lots of impervious cover. Well, we need to have those big wide roads because, people might come over at Thanksgiving or Easter and might need to park in the road because my 150-foot driveway isn't big enough for them to park. So, so we need that big road for those 2 times a year. We see that, and in the bottom left, we see these picture with this huge cul-de-sac in it, where you drive to the end of the road and you get this big circle of pavement in case we need a fire truck to come down there, and turn around. On the lower right-hand corner, you can see rain gardens built into the side of the road, these curved bump outs. So these become very nice systems in here. And those are another way to kind of disconnect impervious cover. You can see the upper left-hand corner of this picture shows you just a downspout disconnection. Here in the next picture down, they're running the water into the vegetative area along the house. Here they're running it onto a driveway that has grass and what we call grass pavers here. In this spot over here, we can see this is the EPA in Edison. They have porous asphalt there, pervious concrete, and they do a lot of testing there to show how it works. So these are ways that we can change the pavement that we use and disconnect these impervious surfaces. Minimizing land grading. So this is another thing that we try to do. You can see preserving natural lands in the upper left-hand corner, and then kind of what we do in New Jersey, right? Clear cut it, and then we put a road in, big houses, big lots, no open space. So trying not to do that lower right corner, instead thinking about the upper left corner. In the end, on the upper left-hand side, you can see those houses certainly, I think, have a lot more value than the houses on the lower right side because of the way they're configured and all that open space that's part of this development around there. So that's another way to think about clustering your houses. Providing low maintenance landscaping. You can see, all these lawn areas, lots of lawn areas. You'll notice in the lower left-hand side, the grass on the White House. We don't like the grass in the White House. The X isn't on the White House. We can't say anything bad about the White House, but there's no reason to have that lawn there. All lawn, that could be a really nice meadow in some areas. So all these places where we're cutting all this grass gets to be something we're trying to avoid. Instead, we start thinking about things like this, natural landscapes. That picture in the center is a little bit of a wildflower meadow in front of somebody's house. Some of that requires township ordinances to be passed so that you can allow that to happen. a lot of towns would consider that weeds and fine you and make you cut that down. So you have to consider what your town ordinance allows and see if you can't change the ordinance to allow you to have a more natural area at your house. We've seen a lot of people kind of do that. So the other thing that we think a lot about is how do we move water around a property? Mostly we move it in concrete pipes. If we can use these natural conveyance systems like this one on the upper right, grass waterway, the lower right where you have grass along between the roadway and the sidewalk. And the one on the lower left is interesting because people say, well, it's too steep to use grass waterway. We need to pipe it. Well, not really. You can put these stone check dams in and the water will build up behind the dam and kind of overflow into the next area. So it's a way to slow the water down so you can prevent it from eroding. What we don't like is the upper left-hand corner with all the riprap. It really does not help infiltration. It may stabilize that channel, but it's expensive and probably unnecessary because that is not a very steep area. So there's a checklist. There's a checklist that you can use to see if they've actually looked at these non-structural strategies. This is something that we encourage towns to make sure they use. It's contained in the Best Management Practice Manual by DEP. So the other thing we had done was we started talking about kind of asking the right questions, right? So we have in here these checklists. And these are the questions that, if you answer no to any of these questions, then you're really not kind of in compliance with the regulations. So the way this was set up, and we worked on this with New Jersey DEP quite extensively, was that, as you're going through these questions, if somebody says no to this, then we're not telling them they can't develop. They have to go back and fix their development plan. We never tell people to not develop. That's not our job, is to say don't develop. But our job is to make sure they develop in an environmentally conscious way and follow the regulations. So you can see some of these questions in here. A lot of it pertains to the low impact development checklist that I showed you, and trying to make sure that all these folks are, complying with these 9 non-structural strategies, right? So a lot of times we were printing these out, giving these to towns, and towns would post these on their website, or they would use this as part of the development package and say, answer these questions. If you answer no to any questions, then you'll have to explain yourself. You can see here in this question, if no, the applicant is incomplete at this time, application is incomplete at this time, it can be deemed acceptable contingent upon obtaining the appropriate deed restrictions. So in this case, what they want to make sure is that if you're saying this piece of the land is set aside to manage stormwater, then you have to deed restrict it. And that prevents the next property owner from coming in and eliminating that piece of land. So if you have a rain garden on front of your property and development is considering that rain garden as managing a piece of stormwater from that property, it needs to be written in the deed that that's a piece of land that always must stay as a rain garden. Okay? And cost is not a reason for non-compliance. You didn't see that in here anywhere. The only reason to not use non-structural strategies is, let me see, we have that in here. So you can see on the bottom, the only acceptable reason for no is engineering, environmental, and/or safety reasons. Cost is not a reason. It's too expensive to do that. Is not a reason. Okay. So engineering, it won't work. It's too steep. We can't put a grass waterway in there, and even with check dams, it won't work. Environmental, it's going to cause more issues than it's going to protect. Or safety. A lot of people don't want deep ditches in their backyard where kids might be playing, so that might be a reason to pipe that area as opposed to putting a grass waterway in. So these are things that we think about, and a lot of developers say it's too expensive, and I'm sorry, but you got to take that out of your profits. That's just the way it is. It's the regulations. So next thing we do is we focus on incorporating systems to address water quality and groundwater recharge. So we think about non-point source pollution and pollution that washes off the land. Nobody's running around New Jersey breaking thermometers in our lakes. The reason we have high mercury in our waterways is a lot of that settles into the atmosphere because we happen to be downwind of Ohio where they burn coal, and metals are released into the atmosphere and then settle out on our rooftops and on our pavement, and then is washed into our waterways. So these are areas where pollutants accumulate, and we need to protect them. Lots of non-point source pollution, oil and grease from cars, petroleum hydrocarbons, which is the oil and grease. That's the number one reason we can't dredge a lot of our waterways, because the concentration in the sediment in the lake is so high that this dredged sediments would have to be disposed as a hazardous material, and that's very expensive. Fertilizer, we put that on our lawn to make our grass grow. When fertilizer gets into the streams and lakes, it makes the algae grow. Algae is a plant, so during the day when the sunlight's out, algae through photosynthesis will take in CO2 and pump oxygen into your lake. At night, the algae respire and take in oxygen, and your oxygen starts to dip down in your lake. When the algae die, microbes come in to decompose them, and oxygen dips even further because those microbes use that during the decomposition process. The trick is, too, the warmer the water is, the less oxygen holds. So it's not unusual for you to have 2 or 3 weeks of very dry weather, wake up in the morning, look out to your lake, and see all the fish floating on the surface because the dissolved oxygen dipped below 1 part per million. Animal waste, we do worry a lot about picking up after dogs. We're very good in the state about that. Unless you're at the Jersey Shore, for some reason, every time I go down there, it seems like people take a vacation from working, but also a vacation from picking up after their dogs. It's kind of disheartening. But the animal waste that we really worry about are the geese in the center picture there. The originally from Canada, has recently relocated to New Jersey, lives here all year long. The average lifespan of a goose is 26 years. One goose will produce 10 pounds of feces a week. I just learned the other day that the impact of 4 geese is equal to 1 septic system. So that becomes another issue. Grass clippings, people throw their grass clippings into the river, into the catch basin. They're filled with nutrients. When they decompose, they hurt the waterway. Septic systems, we still have about 350,000 septic systems in New Jersey. They have to be pumped and taken care of on a regular basis. Sewage leaks, household cleaning products. Litter is a big one. Agriculture is another really source of pollution, but sediment is the number one pollutant in the nation. So it's soil that washes off agricultural lands, washes off your lawn, but probably more importantly, washes off that construction site that's not being properly controlled. Okay, so those are things we think about. So we think about impacts of non-point source pollution, fish and wildlife, recreation. We can see this summer we had these harmful algal blooms. So a lot of nutrients have gotten into these waterways, causing the algae to grow, and lakes are closed for recreation. Property values drop. Economic distress sets in where restaurants are on lakes. So we can see that happening. Years ago, when we had trash washing up on the Jersey Shore, the same thing happened, right? So a lot of tourism, a lot of economic impact is associated with unclean waterways. So we have to worry about that aspect of it. So groundwater recharge is another piece. It requires healthy soils, right? So permeability and hydraulic conductivity are really the same thing. It's how fast water moves into the ground. Okay, so water has to infiltrate at least at a ½ inch per hour for you to be able to put a system in that's going to be designed to infiltrate stormwater into the ground. It can't infiltrate faster than 10 inches per hour because the water moves into the ground too quickly. Okay, there needs to be a vertical separation between the seasonal high water table or the groundwater table and the bottom of your infiltration system. And you have to keep it away from basements and foundations and septic systems. You don't want to be infiltrating stormwater right next to your house and having it go in your basement. That could be a huge issue. So we try to keep any kind of rain guard infiltration system at least 10 feet away from a house with a foundation. Okay, and you can see here is a little photograph or a little sketch of groundwater recharge. So it's away from the basement of the house. You see it's a safe distance, and it's above the seasonal high water table. So you have a minimum 2 feet beneath the infiltration system and the water table, so the water has a place to go. Okay, if water doesn't have a place to go, that basin, that infiltration best management practice becomes a swamp, and that breeds mosquitoes and doesn't function the way it's been designed to function. Okay, so the number one system that we'll see as we move forward with the 2020 regulations will be bioretention systems. So bioretention system is bio, which means life. Retention means a system that holds water. They're designed to capture water and slowly infiltrate into the ground. The vegetation helps take up some of the nutrients. There's usually a mulch layer in there that allows microbes to decompose some of the pollutants. And as water moves to the soil, into the soil, pollutants adhere to the soil and also get degraded over time. You can see the picture in the upper left-hand corner is one of my favorite pictures. It's a natural bioretention system. On the left side of it, which is close to the road, it's got a nice mowed edge, but on the back of it, it's a natural system that kind of blends into the wooded area. The one in the upper right-hand corner is what we call a curb bump out, or a stormwater planter, where water runs along the curb and goes into this area and slowly infiltrates into the ground. The lower left should be in every single box store we have in New Jersey where they have these traffic islands. Every one of those islands should be a bioretention system where it's capturing stormwater and recharging the water into the ground. And the lower right-hand picture is the blue house picture, which is required to have in every bioretention presentation. The water runs along the curb and goes into this rain garden in front of this house. You can see it certainly adds value to the house. It's a beautiful feature. In this development in Minnesota, it was one of the first places to use it. They were going to put in catch basin and storm sewers, and they realized if they gave everybody a rain garden, it would be a lot cheaper and also enhance the property value, and that's what they did. So a lot of people will use this picture as you go out through your careers as environmental commissioners or on zoning boards or planning boards. You might see this photograph quite often. Okay, so in the regulations, they have the systems rated. So bioretention system, rain garden gets 90% removal. Now, this only works if you design it in accordance with the Stormwater Best Management Practice Manual. So there's criteria in how to design each one of these systems. If you design it that way, you will get the removal rate that's shown on the right-hand side of this table. If you do an alternative design, you will not get that removal rate. You'll have to justify what your removal rate is. The bottom one is these pre-manufactured treatment devices, which varies in removal rates, and I'll show you what some of those are. This is what we call there's two types of systems. One is on the right-hand side is called a hydrodynamic separator, also known as the swirly device. Water comes in, swirls around, and sediment settles out in the middle, and clean water comes out. Those are rated to remove about 50% of the sediment. The one on the left is a filter system, like your Brita filter you would have on your faucet, or one of those systems, and that'll get about 80% sediment removal. Now, these systems have to be approved by New Jersey DEP. There's a system called New Jersey Corporation of Advanced Technology that reviews all the data on these and kind of certifies these, and then DEP approves that certification. So there's a website where all these devices are listed. Somebody comes to you and says, well, I'm using the jellyfish. It gets 80% removal. Well, the jellyfish needs to be one of the systems that is on that website approved. You cannot allow a system to go in that has not been approved by New Jersey DEP. These systems are often, we review the people making and selling these systems, very similar to used car salesmen. You buy my system, it's going to remove 90% of all pollution. It's going to be great. So that becomes another thing. So, yeah, I'll answer some more questions at the end as I keep going, if that's okay. There's a lot of stuff here on the side that I'm beginning to look at. Okay, so let's go on a little bit further here. So there's some general stormwater runoff calculations that we look at. Has the applicant demonstrated pre-construction conditions have been unchanged for the last 5 years? This is really interesting because there's some people have come in and taken a piece of land and they changed it so that the pre-development conditions are more developed than they were beforehand, so they don't have to remove as much stormwater, because when they go to a more developed condition to a major developed condition, it requires less stormwater management than if you went from a natural woody condition to a developed condition. So New Jersey DEP has caught on to that, and they kind of put this in there. If you don't know what it was pre-development, you're supposed to use the wooded land use under good hydrologic conditions, which basically is the worst case scenario for a developer, because that's the nicest, least stormwater runoff compared to his development, which would be the most stormwater runoff. Okay, so the other thing that people used to do is they would take impervious surfaces and pervious surfaces, of grass area and paved area, and blend them together and model them as one system, which was completely ineffective, because then what would happen is you get an inch of rain on that system, nothing would run off, where in reality you would get an inch of rain on the pavement, it would all run off, and you would get an inch of rain on the grass and nothing would run off. So you're missing that amount of runoff. So you really need to model them separately. The last piece is there is a Soil Erosion Sediment Control Act that we have as a state that requires every development that disturbs more than 5,000 square feet of land to get a soil erosion sediment control permit. This is a permit that requires you to put those black silt fences around your site and put hay bales around the catch basins, and have that gravel tracking pad, so when your truck leaves a site, it doesn't take mud on the road. And you can see in New Jersey that although we have those regulations, often they're not enforced. You can drive by any construction site and see that there's mud on the road, and there's very little being done to enforce that. Most of the soil conservation districts relies on the public to call and complain so they can come out and inspect, because they don't have enough inspectors. So it's not that they don't want to enforce, it's more of the fact of lack of manpower due to budget cuts. So they rely a lot on the public to be turning in developers and say, hey, there's a development on Main Street and there's mud everywhere, could you come out and look at it? And they'll come out and look at it and stop construction until they fix that problem. So that's another very important piece of what we hope people will do. Okay. So water quality. So these questions are simple. Are you removing 80% of total spent solids? Are you using a protocol or a system that has been approved by New Jersey DEP? In other words, one that was in that table. Are you designing it in accordance with the Stormwater Best Management Practice Manual? So that becomes very important. If you're not, if you're using your own system, have you provided enough information to show that it also does remove 80% of the total spent solids? Rarely does somebody come in with a development and say, I've got my own brand new stormwater system. I'm not going to use what's recommended by DEP. I have never seen that in my life, but it's opportunities in here to do that. Number 7 is interesting. Minimum depth between seasonal high water table, infiltration rates, and a 72-hour drain time. Like I said, the infiltration rate has to be at least a half inch per hour. Okay, so that's very important. You have to have a depth of 1 to 2 feet above the seasonal high water table for your system to be functioning, and it has to be shown to drain within 72 hours. 72 hours is a time limit when mosquitoes start to breed, so they require you to have it draining at that time. And there's also soil testing criteria in the Best Management Practice Manual. One thing we see a lot of is people will be designing an infiltration basin that's going to be 4 feet deep, yet they do the soil testing near the surface. Okay, so 1 foot below the surface, look, the infiltration rate is great. They did down 4 feet and they realized the infiltration rate, it's all clay, it's not infiltrating at all, but they designed it as if it had that surface infiltration rate. So you have to be very careful about that. Hopefully your municipal engineer will follow that and be able to catch on to that. But this is a question you can ask them. Have they followed the soil criteria, testing criteria in siting and sizing and designing their stormwater practice? Okay. Pre-manufactured treatment devices, do they meet the requirement? Are they DEP approved? So these are other ones. Are they online or offline devices? So does the entire flow go through the system? That's a problem, because if you have the 100-year storm flowing through a system that can only handle the first inch of rain, it's going to flush all that sediment out. So you have to be very careful about those things. There's some stuff in here about special resource protection areas. Certain parts of the state have these special areas, and you have to have those delineated and make sure you're in compliance with those regulations. Groundwater recharge requirement. Now, this is interesting. There is a spreadsheet that the New Jersey Geological Survey, NJGS, created. It's called the GSR 32 spreadsheet. And what happens is every major development must complete the spreadsheet and turn it in to show that here's the groundwater recharge before I develop, here's the groundwater recharge after I develop. Even if they come in and say the entire site is clay, there is no groundwater recharge, I would still ask for this spreadsheet. So I have it for my files to justify that that is not the case. Okay, it would protect you later on from New Jersey DEP. So that's something to kind of think a little bit about. So these talk about the maintaining 100% annual average groundwater recharge or recharging difference between the 2-year storm pre and post development. It also talks a little bit about have you avoided adverse hydrologic impacts. So in other words, if you're infiltrating in an area and water builds up underneath that infiltration system, is it going to leak into a basement or come out of the side of a roadway? Is it going to have a problem? Where's that mound of water underneath your system going to go? So that's what number 6 really pertains to in this questionnaire. So the last piece of this is designing to meet stormwater peak runoff rates. So, these are the requirements that we have. And, these are pretty straightforward. Every engineer who's done any of this work in New Jersey understands this. They've been doing this since late 1980s, so they kind of understand how to do this. Like I said, there's a bunch of different requirements. C is the one that everybody uses. Has the applicant submitted a hydrologic or hydraulic analysis demonstrating the post-construction peak rates for the 2, the 10, 100-year storm are 50, 75, or 80% of the pre-construction rate. So for the 100-year storm, that doesn't mean you have to reduce the peak by 80%. It means you have to reduce the peak to 80%. Like I said, so if the peak was 1,000, right, cubic feet per second, then it has to be 800 after your development. So it's reducing it really by 20% down to that 80% level. So people get a little bit confused with that at times, okay? Then there's these things in here about structural maintenance, which is kind of weird because as engineers, we really worry about safety and structural stuff to begin with. It's part of our code of ethics. Number 1 is very important. We don't have a diameter outfall less than 2.5 inches because that's the size of a red Solo cup, and it can clog the outfall. So I'm not really sure if the red Solo cup was taken into consideration, but often when we see an outfall clog, that's what's causing it. So we think about things that are going to clog the outfall, and that's why we have that opening at least 2.5 inches in size. Make sure you have a maintenance plan. Maintenance plan is very important. Maintenance plan should have in it the task, schedule, cost estimates, contact information of responsible party, who's going to take care of it. If maintenance is required by another entity, then a copy of the agreement must be included in the application. You cannot build a detention basin or any kind of stormwater system on somebody's property and make them maintain it. Okay, so you used to have detention basins on people's property, and then people buy that property. Say, look, I got this great open space, and now they're required to maintain it. So we try to avoid that. Okay, starting your schedule scan. I'll run that later. Okay, so safety is another issue. Talking about having trash racks on so people don't get sucked into pipes. I'll never forget, there used to be a show on ER with George Clooney, was one of the doctors, and I was watching him down on the couch with my wife, and this kid had fell into the stormwater system, and he was trapped, and George Clooney had to jump in and save him, and my wife's on the edge of the couch. Oh my God, he's going to save these kids, and all I kept thinking was, who's the idiot who designed that? There's no trash rack. Somebody should use their professional engineering license. This is just wrong. So we already consider this stuff when we take this into account. These regulations seem a little redundant to me because we are required to do this ethically, but it doesn't hurt to check this and make sure it's in compliance. So, okay, so in the end, the best way to comply is you first incorporate the non-structural strategies, you address water quality and groundwater recharge, and then you design for the water quantity criteria. So, and in the end, you're the only one who can approve these regulations, you as a township official. It cannot be approved by the state. So those are some of the things that we have for you today. What we've seen with this is we've had these questions you post it on our website as individual pages, and you can print those out and you can use those as part of the review process. We've had members of planning board ask select questions that they see often are not complied with, something like the deed restriction aspects of it or the maintenance plan aspects of it. So I think making sure you understand the questions and making sure that the developer has the answers to those questions and that goes on record is very important, so that you can protect yourself as your liability as a municipality. So in the end, at the end of the year, there's somebody in your town who's a stormwater coordinator. And that person has to fill out a sheet at the end of the year saying that they've complied with all the MS4 permitting rules. And one of the rules is that all the developments that were approved satisfy those stormwater management criteria. So someone's signing that, authorizing that. If the state comes back and finds out that that's not true, not only is the town liable, but that individual person who signed that is also liable. So these become issues. Now, we do have this this online. There is a asking the right questions, which is called an e-learning tool. So what I just told you, in an hour and a half, you can sit down, pour yourself a nice glass of wine, and sit by the fireplace and go through your computer and probably learn in about 35 or 40 minutes and go through this presentation there and refresh it. If you're here, what wound up happening is we'd go give this live and we'd have 100 people show up, and at the end of the presentation, 5 or 10 of them would come up and say, listen, I'm the only person here for my planning board. They all should have been here. Can you come to my town and give the presentation? And that answer usually is no, because I'm only one person and there's 565 municipalities. So we created this e-learning tool so that you don't have to try to repeat what I told you. You can go home and just go through the e-learning tool and have them people do that. So that becomes important. So let's go through some of these questions in the chat box and see if I can answer them. Hopefully I can. So where do you want me to go, Holly? Okay. Okay, green roofs leak. No, they don't, actually. What's interesting about green roofs is it's very difficult to retrofit an existing building with a green roof because it's very heavy. The green roof will weigh between 15 and 35 pounds per square foot. The standard roof on a building is usually a rubber membrane that's covered in tar. That black tar expands and contracts in the heat and the cold. It cracks, and that's why your roof leaks. So every 5 to 7 years, your roof needs to be redone. If you're Rutgers University, you usually wait 10 or 12 years and then act surprised while it's leaking. The green roof has lots of material on the roof. So it has the membrane, but also has soil and other material to insulate that membrane so it doesn't expand and contract. It doesn't crack. A green roof will last 25 to 30 years. It's a great system. People who run facilities don't want to hear about storing water on the roof. Makes them very nervous. But that really is not a case and not a problem. If you do have a lot of air conditioning units and things like that on your roof that you need access to, you can take that into account when you're designing your green roof. A green roof is great for new construction because you can factor in the weight when you're building the building. For retrofitting existing building, it's not always a great choice. And once again, the green roof will only manage about a ½ inch of rain. So you have to also keep that in mind. So the cost effectiveness of it is not very high, but it can be a really neat system to have on the roof. Okay. How recently has the 100-year storm been revised? The amount's been revised. I believe it might be 10 or 15 years ago that was done. It's probably due to be done again. I would rather see them look at the climate change models and kind of predict what it's going to be over the next 20 years so we can design something that we don't have to change. You think about all the detention basins that were built before 2004, all were designed for a 100-year storm that's an inch less than it is now. So if we get the 100-year storm now, most of those basins will fail and not be able to hold that. Okay, what are the penalties for not meeting requirements of post-development? Like I said before, is the town, the New Jersey DEV has coming around and doing audits of towns. In some cases, I believe fines have been levied. For most cases, the town's feet have just been held to the fire to come into compliance. As we go on and on with this process, I think you'll see more and more fines being levied on towns and because they're not complying, especially if they're repeat offenders. Are there any changes upcoming on the new rules that would not allow a developer to skirt recharge if a town is in an urban development zone? Not that I'm aware of. So there are these urban development zones where you don't have to do groundwater recharge. We have rewritten, we have proposed a new ordinance in Trenton that even if it's redevelopment, you have to do some sort of level of stormwater management. So you do have to hold the first inch of rain for an extended period of time and infiltrate if you can. If not, hold it for a certain period of time before you let out slowly into the system. So you can change that to a certain extent, but the urban redevelopment zone, the idea with that was to let's not make those requirements as stringent as everybody else, to encourage people to develop in those areas. There's a lot of thought given to this now about how we need to go back and still require redevelopment to comply with a certain level of regulations. These new rules that are coming out, if they do get approved after the new year, they're already working on the next round of regulations that's going to incorporate a lot of the redevelopment stuff into it. So we'll see changes as we continue on over the next couple of years. Are some towns which probably have poor record of enforcing standards? If so, where? Yeah, let me call out all the mayors in towns that aren't enforcing standards. I'm sorry, I can't do that. DEP does know certain towns that have not been in compliance. There are a lot of watershed groups and other nonprofit groups that will alert the state to towns that aren't complying. And I believe the hope is to get them in compliance as opposed to get them in trouble. So we do see some of that. There has been some lawsuits I've seen where groups have sued towns because they're not enforcing the regulations. So we've seen some of that happen. I think that's another issue. So stormwater mitigation plan, somebody asked about that. Yes, it's a municipal plan. We have been, here at Rutgers, we've been doing impervious cover reduction action plans, which actually identify, 10 to 30 sites in town that can be retrofitted with stormwater management. Some towns are beginning to look at that and take that, so maybe this could be our stormwater mitigation plan and putting a front end on that, and then they have a plan that has all the projects identified. What's nice about those plans is they're all online. So if you're a developer and you need another 500,000 gallons of groundwater recharge, you can go into that plan and say, oh, here's a site at the school. If I build this rain garden, I can get that. Let me build this project to offset my impact. So it's a really nice way of kind of doing that. And like I said, the town cannot allow a development to go in that does not meet the criteria or has less requirements than the state criteria. You can have more stringent requirements in the state, but not less stringent requirements in the state in your township ordinance. So some towns, Cranford's a great example. They're very worried about flooding. So if you even had 400 square feet of impervious cover in Cranford, you have to do something to manage some additional stormwater. So that becomes very important. Are there any database citizens? Wow, so this person's asking about a database that you can access to see, I guess, good examples of stormwater management. My experience, I actually am on my planning board and my green team, and my experience is that, a lot of towns have very good developments that come in. They're all not bad actors, but I don't have anything handy. I think ANJAC does a really good session that was part of this winter where they train new environmental commissioners and actually go through a plan review. And Liz Ritter and I had a great time kind of doing that stuff and showing you, here's good development versus bad development. Here's something to look for and here's the way that some developers will present it that's a little misleading. So we've done a little bit of that. So the other issue is there's brownfield sites that we see a lot of in New Jersey, which are sites that have been contaminated, and there's a lot of redevelopment of those sites. So most often you cannot recharge groundwater into a brownfield site, which does not mean you cannot manage stormwater, you just can't recharge it. So you can still put a stormwater management system in. A lot of these systems, the rain garden, bioretention system, or even the pervious pavement, they can be designed with under drain systems, so the water will filter through the system and get clean and get to this under drain pipe that'll take it away to the storm source system or to the stream, but the water will be much cleaner, and then usually 24 or 36 hours after the storm event. So you can still design things for these brownfield sites, even though you may not be allowed to recharge groundwater. Whether you can recharge groundwater or not is usually a function of the cleanup criteria associated with that site. Is there a good substitute of riprap where it is necessary? There's different ways you can stabilize soil. There are some different material that you can reinforce turf that you can use. There's some matting you can use. Once you get some heavy vegetation established, it may work. The soil erosion sediment control manual has some very good calculations of how fast water is moving down a certain slope, and at a certain time, if it's moving too fast, you really do need to go to some sort of stone system to stabilize, or even a concrete system to stabilize it if it's very steep. So some of those we can't avoid. Other places we might be able to keep the water out of going down that area where it's very steep, and that might be another way of kind of thinking about it. Where do we go for guidance for safe distance from septic systems? I believe that's in the New Jersey DEP Best Management Practice Manual of how far you're supposed to keep the bioretention system away from the septic system. I believe it's 50 feet, and that's the issue. Sometimes you get away with a little bit less, but usually 50 feet. You really don't want stormwater recharged in the same place as the sanitary water, right? So septic system collects the solids in a tank, and then the liquid gets discharged to a field, leaching field, and that gets treated as it moves to the soil. If you add stormwater to that, you'll overtax the field and you'd have problems. Notwithstanding previous developed properties which may be upheld to the recharge rules reclassification. This comes up all the time in our town. Can claim they are not held to recharge requirements urban development zone. Are there any changes? Yeah, once again, the urban development zone keeps coming up. I'm not sure the new regulations really address that. But I would imagine that would be addressed in the next round. Why couldn't you use a percolation rate of less than a half inch per hour if the increase in footprint is true? Yeah, so the percolation rate, a half inch per hour, is kind of what the minimum is for New Jersey DEP Best Management Practice Manual. The idea is if it's less than a half inch per hour, there is potential to clog. If you measure 1 inch per hour, or you measure a half inch per hour when you do your calculations, you have to assume that, twice, right? And twice the rate. So there's a doubling factor in there, a safety factor, So I think that's another piece of it. So if you measure 1 inch per hour, you have to assume that infiltration is a half inch per hour, just in case there's some clogging along the way. Most of these natural vegetative systems, we don't really see a lot of clogging because the roots tend to open up the pores, and actually infiltration tends to increase over time in some of these bioretention systems or natural systems. Okay, stormwater regulations indicate that gravel is considered an impervious cover, yet we see gravel surrounding underground infiltration galleries. Why isn't gravel considered impervious? So gravel, where there's vehicle traffic, is usually considered a impervious surface. Where there's not vehicle traffic, you could argue that it's not. I think regulations at DEP just assumes that all gravel is an impervious surface. That way there's no argument. So I think that's part of it. You'll also see as we move forward to new regulations, you need to remove 80% of the total suspended solids, but you need to water quality treatment of paved areas, but only paved areas, only impervious surfaces that are subject to vehicle traffic. So rooftops, you wouldn't have to do that for. It's considered cleaner water. So they've changed that a little bit in new regulations. Whether that gets carried through to the final version or not, I'm not sure. A lot of people protested that, so we're not sure if that's going to go through. EPA states that along with sediment pollution, thermal pollution runoff from hot asphalt in the summer, serious pollution too reduces to yes. So there is it's very interesting that thermal pollution is something that a lot of people overlook, right? So thermal pollution is that when we discharge heated water into a waterway, it raises the temperature and can destroy the aquatic community. That heated water can be from non-contact cooling tank water that we see associated with any kind of industry that may have a cooling system. They usually run water around that system to cool it down, and that hot water gets dumped into the waterway. Another way is you have a huge parking lot at the Home Depot that heats up during the day. It rains, and that hot water gets carried to the waterway. So that's another stressor that we worry about, which is another reason to recommend permeable pavement. So porous asphalt doesn't heat up as much as regular impermeable asphalt because porous asphalt breathes, and that ability for air to move through those pores of the asphalt cools it down. So it's another way to kind of deal with temperature. So, once again, about the new stormwater regulations recently released by New Jersey DEP, I hear it's somewhat controversial. I'm not sure how controversial it is. I have not been part of the process. I've been asked to go to a couple listening sessions. I've heard the regulations. There's a couple issues now that they're trying to push with the new regulations. One is trying to get away from using these big basins at the bottom of the hill, instead incorporating stormwater management throughout the entire development, which is a great thing from a stormwater management perspective. But if it's not done properly, it could be a nightmare for maintenance. Imagine a 50-lot subdivision where all 50 lots have a rain garden, and you rely on every homeowner to maintain their rain garden for the stormwater to be managed effectively from that property. I could see where that might be an issue. We've already seen in areas where they built a lot of rain gardens, people sell the houses, and people come in and fill the rain garden in. So I don't want that hole by my mailbox, and they fill it in, they turn it back into grass, they just destroy their stormwater system. Well, then people say, well, it's deed restricted, though. They can't do that. Well, the green acres behind my house is deed restricted, yet I see neighbors cutting down all the trees and putting their playground equipment there and extending their property back into that. Nobody enforces that requirement either. So deed restriction is one thing, enforcing that deed restriction is another thing, and assigning penalties for people who don't comply is another thing. So there's a lot that has to happen here for this to kind of work. But in theory, the idea of having stormwater management spread out throughout the entire development is a much healthier idea for the environment than it is to have one of those big basins at the bottom of the hill. It's a much more effective way of managing stormwater. Okay, stop. What entity approves the plan? Stop already. So you as a town have to approve the stormwater management strategy. If there is a stormwater mitigation plan, that goes to the county as part of your update to your stormwater control ordinance and your stormwater management plan. The county reviews that and approves that. So it'll be interesting to see how many people start doing that. As we get more and more development in New Jersey, we're running out of, I guess, we're more into marginal land now that we're developing, a lot of redevelopment. And if you're trying to hold people's feet to the fire with these requirements, they may not be able to satisfy everything on site. So there may be a stronger need for stormwater mitigation, doing project off-site to offset impacts associated with major development. The problem with that is I could see towns saying, well, yeah, don't worry about groundwater recharge, just give us a check, we're going to do a project over here. And so they'll use that money to fix past problems. Meanwhile, they're allowing new development to create new problems. So you kind of have to really balance that out. Big fear we always have, too, is that if you start collecting money and putting it in a fund that's dedicated to stormwater management, and that fund gets looted for soccer fields or other things like that, there needs to be safeties put in place so that doesn't happen, too. So people get concerned a little bit about those things. So those are some of the issues that I've heard in the past, but I think in the end, it's it's a better way of managing stormwater, and I think we can do a better job in New Jersey if we all enforce the regulations, which to this date I don't think has been done as much as it should be. So hopefully I've answered all your questions. Like I said, this will be recorded, or this has been recorded. This will be posted on ANJEC's website. We have one more question. What? Oh, stormwater utilities. Okay, thanks, Sean, for putting me under that light. So New Jersey has passed a regulation, or passed a law that allows towns to form a stormwater utility. And there have been towns that are very interested in this. Right now, the way we manage stormwater, the way we pay for it is out of our property taxes. A lot of times, people who are generating the most stormwater aren't paying the most for stormwater management. We have a lot of parking lots that are paid parking. We pay to park there, but they don't pay to manage the stormwater from that parking lot. Yes, they have a huge impact. So the whole idea with a stormwater utility is that we charge a fee to property owners based on their impervious cover, based on their contribution to the stormwater problem. The idea is that it's a better way of doing it because it's fairer. So if you're contributing more stormwater because you have more impervious cover, you pay a higher fee. It's a fee, not a tax. Tax you have to pay, a fee you can avoid. You avoid the fee by putting in stormwater management practices. So if you have a single-family home and you're expected to pay $125 a year for a stormwater utility fee, and you decide you're going to put a rain garden to treat the runoff from your driveway, and you reduce your impervious footprint by half, then theoretically your fee should go down by half every year. So this is a way you avoid the fee. This is a way that you get private dollars investing in stormwater management. So if you own a big warehouse, it might be cheaper to put in some stormwater management practices instead of paying that fee every year because you have such a large impervious footprint. And now we're getting private dollars going into managing stormwater, which could be a really, really great thing. The idea with a stormwater utility is not to collect money. The idea with the stormwater utility is to manage stormwater. So to just collect enough in fees to be able to manage stormwater, not just to maintain existing systems, but to also build new systems that will help reduce flooding and improve water quality. And yes, I do see a lot of interest in this. I have a lot of people talking to me about this. So I think over the next few years, we will see some of these stormwater utilities come into play in New Jersey. And they are in many states throughout the nation. I believe 40 states have utilities. So we're a little behind the ball on that one, getting that started. Okay, thanks for your time. I appreciate it. I'm going to log off now and go have my Five Guys burger, something nice and healthy for dinner. I appreciate you guys listening, and take care. Okay. Stop recording.
Thank you. Please stand by.